Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that is just, well, it's wild. We're talking about Brazil's very first absolute speed record car. It's a piece of automotive history that perfectly blends engineering genius, sheer bravery, and honestly, absolute tragedy. Let's get right into it. Picture a machine that looks way more like a flying saucer than a race car. That is the Carcará. Today, we're going to uncover exactly how a rogue team of engineers took a tiny 1.0-liter engine and hit unthinkable speeds back in 1966. With its completely enclosed side profile, flat lines, and hidden wheels, this thing was literally built to slice right through the air. Section 1. A bold Brazilian dream. So our story actually begins in this intense do-or-die moment. It's 1965, and the German parent brand Auto Union just got bought out by Volkswagen. By June of 1966, the DKW Vemog racing department in Brazil knew their days were severely numbered. The closure was officially on the calendar. But instead of just quietly packing up their tools and going home, they decided to launch a secret project. They wanted one final, glorious bang to cement their legacy, setting the very first Brazilian absolute speed record. And the name they chose, it tells you everything you need to know. They called it Carcará. Now, the Carcará is a fearless Brazilian bird of prey. It's deeply embedded in the local culture, even immortalized in a popular song back then as the bird that, quote, catches, kills, and eats. They said it had more courage than a man. It was the absolute perfect name for their predatory goal of hunting down a speed record that nobody in South America had ever even dared to try. Section 2. The Dream Team Assembly. To pull off what was basically an impossible mission, racing chief Jorge Letri had to assemble a very specific crew of eccentric motorsport geniuses. Think of them as the Ocean's 11 of Brazilian motorsport. You had Rino Molzoni and Anicio Campos, legendary aerodynamic designers who literally hand-beat the aluminum body on a farm out in Medellín. For the frame, chassis experts Chico Landi and Tony Binco repurposed a single-seater frame from a failed Formula Junior category. And for the heart of the beast, they brought in Miguel Crispim, a 20-year-old engine wizard. Now, you really get a sense of the David versus Goliath nature of this whole build when you look at the engine specs. You start with this totally stock, 3-cylinder, 2-stroke DKW engine pushing out a very modest 44 horsepower. But our young wizard, Miguel Crispim, spent sleepless nights manually filing the windows of the engine blocks. He bumped the displacement up just a bit to 1,089 cc, basically a 1.0-liter engine. Through sheer mechanical alchemy, he pushed that little motor to a staggering 104 horsepower at 5,800 RPM. I mean, to put that into perspective, modern 1.0-liter engines usually need direct injection and a turbo to hit those numbers today. Section 3. Taming a flying car. But here's the catch. When you build a literal spaceship around a heavily modified engine, you're going to have some absolutely terrifying test runs. The Carcará's cockpit was so incredibly cramped that the massive steering wheel actually had to be attached after the driver sat down. But the bigger issue? The aerodynamics. During a test run at Interlagos, as the car got close to 200 kilometers per hour, the front end started lifting. It literally wanted to take off. It was so terrifying that the primary driver, Marinho, just flat out quit the project right then and there. So that leaves the team with a massive problem, right? How on earth do you stop a car from taking off? Well, Jorge Letri found a new, completely fearless pilot named Norman Casari who was willing to step up. But Casari still had to deal with the terrifying reality that the high-tech, grippy Pirelli Centenario radial tires were causing the car to wildly swing back and forth like a pendulum at high speeds. Their MacGyver-esque solution to this was dangerously brilliant. Step 1, they completely removed those grippy racing radials. Step 2, they swapped them out for standard bias-plies street tires, literally stolen straight off of a Vemagut street van owned by fellow driver Bob Sharp. Now, less grip stopped the pendulum effect, sure, but those tires were only rated for 150 kilometers per hour. So step 3, to keep these street tires from literally blowing up from the intense heat at over 200 kilometers per hour, the team soaked them in the local Marapendi lagoon to cool them down right before the run. Talk about an improvised effort with an insanely high degree of risk. Section 4. Breaking the speed record. All right, so with the heavily improvised and, quite frankly, dangerously unstable car ready to go, it was time for the ultimate test. On the mornings of June 28th and 29th, 1966, they completely shut down a 5-kilometer stretch of the BR2 Rio Santos highway. Fun fact, that's actually the heavily trafficked Avenida das Americas in Rio de Janeiro today. And right there on a closed public highway, Kasari piloted this tiny-engined aluminum rocket pushing the absolute limits of human courage. And it all comes down to this staggering number, 212.903 kilometers per hour. That was the average speed across 2 passes, all meticulously timed by a state-of-the-art Omega photocell system that Quattro Rotis magazine had imported and sponsored specifically for this event. Now, they had originally hoped to hit 230, but a minor engine issue held them back. Even still, it was an absolute triumph. Now, to be clear, it wasn't a global record. International 1.1-liter records were well over 300 kilometers per hour at that point, but nobody in Brazil or even all of South America had ever attempted anything like this. The Carcará set a pioneering milestone. And what is truly mind-blowing here is that this magnificent achievement for a 1.0-liter car went completely unbeaten in Brazil for almost 4 decades. It finally fell in October 2005 to a highly modified 350-horsepower modern vehicle. And that contrast, that's exactly why this story matters so much to us today. In our current era of computer-calculated multi-million-dollar hypercars, this raw DIY engineering spirit, built in farm sheds, riding on street van tires, and tested on public roads, it stands as just a breathtaking reminder of pure human innovation. Section 5. From Glory to Scrap. You would naturally think a legendary, record-breaking vehicle like this would be immediately preserved in a museum, right? Well, the reality of motorsport in the 1960s was much more pragmatic and, honestly, pretty tragic. When Waymo finally closed its doors, the Carcará was simply handed over to its driver, Norman Kasari. And instead of being preserved, it was unceremoniously ripped apart. Kasari actually needed the Formula Junior chassis to build a new sports prototype with a massive Ford V8 engine. And that stunning, hand-beaten aluminum shell? It was given away and dumped in a shed at a fiberglass company called Glasspack. It just sat there, completely forgotten, until the company needed to clear some space, and they sold it off to a scrap dealer. Fellow driver Bob Sharp really captured the heartbreak of this lost artifact. He noted that they tried searching for it later, but the fastest car in Brazil was almost certainly melted down to make everyday kitchenware. 99% probability, he said, that it ended up as pots and pans. Today, the only surviving original piece of this historic run is a single red cover that draped the car on its glorious record-breaking day, and it just sits in a private collection. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to end this explainer on. How does a physical machine completely vanish into thin air, sold for literal scrap metal, yet leave a legacy that stands totally undefeated for 40 years? The Carcará might have been melted down into pots and pans, sure, but its spirit of underdog engineering, of taking street van tires and a 1.0-liter engine and daring to go over 212 kilometers an hour, that fearless innovation cemented a legacy that vastly outlasted the aluminum it was built from. Thanks so much for joining me to uncover this incredible piece of history.